The first time I saw the footprints, I tried to convince myself they belonged to a bear. They measured almost 16 inches long, clearly defined in the mud beside the creek running through my property. But bears don't leave 5 perfectly separated toes or an arch suggesting permanent upright walking. Those marks in the wet earth of the Cascade Mountains showed me something my rational mind refused to accept. I wasn't alone in these northern Oregon forests. My name is Thomas Henderson. I'm 68 years old, and I just abandoned 150 acres of land my family has worked since 1892. Now I live in a Portland apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where traffic noise never stops and streetlights keep darkness at bay. I sleep with every lamp burning. City people think I'm an eccentric old man. They don't know that every shadow on my former property could hide something science refuses to acknowledge. This isn't senile paranoia or hallucinations from a man who lost too much. I have proof. I have recordings. I have memories that wake me screaming in the night. And I have very concrete reasons why I'll never, under any circumstances, return to the mountains where I was born. My story really begins 3 years ago. Though the foundation was laid much earlier, I lived with my wife Ellen on a ranch that had belonged to 4 generations of Hendersons. 150 acres of virgin forest, rolling meadows and crystal streams in the Cascade. Foothills. Our nearest neighbor was 14 miles away on a dirt road that became impassable during winter. We raised sheep, grew vegetables, and lived almost completely self-sufficiently. Ellen died in March after 6 months fighting pancreatic cancer that consumed her with cruelty that still breaks my soul. Our 2 children, Jennifer and Mark, came for the funeral. Jennifer is a doctor in Seattle, works impossible emergency room shifts, and barely has time to sleep. Mark runs an architecture firm in San Diego and lives attached to his phone, always responding to urgent emails from important clients. Both begged me to sell the ranch and move to the city. They spoke of the dangers of living alone at my age in such a remote place. A heart attack, a fall, a simple injury could kill me before anyone noticed. We had no cell coverage in the valley. The landline went down every strong storm. I was completely isolated, but I refused their pleas. This land was in my blood. My great-grandfather built the main house with logs he cut from the surrounding forest. My grandfather added the barn. My father modernized the property with electricity and plumbing. I was born in the 2nd-floor bedroom and planned to die on this land. The small family cemetery behind the house contained 5 generations of Hendersons. Ellen's grave was the most recent, marked with a grey marble headstone that said simply, Ellen Marie Henderson, beloved wife and mother. So I stayed. I kept the sheep, tended the garden, and found comfort in the routines Ellen and I had shared for 43 years. Mornings began before dawn. I fed the animals, collected eggs from my 30 chickens, and made coffee on the old wood stove. Days passed in endless work. Repairing fences, cutting wood, keeping buildings in livable condition. I knew the environmental dangers. The Cascades housed black bears, mountain lions, wolves, and occasionally grizzly bears coming down from the north. I'd lost sheep to predators before. It was part of living where civilization ended and true wilderness began. I kept a .30-06 rifle by the front door and a .45 caliber pistol on my belt. When working outside, most predators avoided humans, but hunger could make any animal dangerous. The forest surrounding my property had always been a source of beauty and unease. Giant firs rose 200 feet toward the sky, their canopies so dense that noon seemed like twilight beneath their shade. Animal trails crossed the undergrowth, worn by generations of deer, elk, and bears. I hunted at the forest edges and gathered fallen wood for winter, but rarely ventured more than half a mile from the house. Something in that deep forest felt wrong. A primitive instinct warned me of places where man wasn't welcome. Over the years, I'd heard things in those trees I couldn't explain, sounds that weren't exactly animal or exactly human wood knocks that resonated through the forest at strange hours. Vocalizations resembling ape calls, but carrying an intelligence that raised my skin. Ellen used to dismiss these sounds as my imagination or ordinary wildlife noises, and I convinced myself she was right. Every forest has its mysteries, its inexplicable sounds. The mind can play tricks in the wilderness, especially during long winter months when isolation weighs like a physical burden. But after Ellen's death, when the house fell silent, except for the ticking of her grandmother's clock and the creaking of old beams, I began paying closer attention to forest sounds. Without Ellen's rational explanations to comfort me, the nocturnal noises took on a more sinister quality. The wood knocks became more frequent, occurring in patterns suggesting communication. Vocalizations grew bolder, sometimes answered by similar calls from different directions. Most disturbing were the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, bipedal that occasionally echoed from the tree line long after nightfall. During my first summer alone, I began finding signs that something large moved through the forest near my property. Massive tracks in soft earth near the creek, too large to belong to any known animal trees, with bark stripped at heights no bear could reach. Arrangements of stones and sticks that seemed deliberate, almost ritual. I told myself these were natural phenomena. Coincidence and imagination combined to create patterns where none existed. The first livestock attack occurred in late July. I found one of my young sheep dead in the pasture nearest the forest. Its neck was twisted at an impossible angle. The force needed to break a 150-pound animal's neck was astonishing. I assumed a grizzly bear somehow knocked it down, though I found no claw marks or typical signs of a bear attack. The carcass hadn't been eaten, which struck me as odd. Predators kill to eat, not for sport. I dragged the body deep into the forest and tried to forget the incident. 3 weeks later, I lost 7 chickens in a single night. I found them scattered around the coop, not eaten, but dead with what seemed like surgical precision. Their necks had been cleanly broken and the bodies arranged in a strange, circular pattern. Again, no signs of typical predation, no drag marks, no feeding, no obvious entry point to the coop. It was as if something had reached through the wire mesh and killed them for pleasure. After the chicken incident, I reinforced the coop with heavier gauge wire and added a padlock to the door. I also installed motion-activated floodlights around the immediate house area, hoping to deter whatever was hunting my livestock. The lights triggered frequently during the first nights, deer, elk, and other wild animals moving through the property. But gradually nocturnal activity decreased. Either animals had adjusted to the lights, or something was keeping them away. It was during this period when Mark, my son, made an unexpected visit. He'd taken a rare week off work and decided to check on his old father, as he put it. Mark had never fully embraced ranch life, preferring digital design to physical labor, but he understood technology in ways that often amazed me. When I mentioned the livestock attacks and my security concerns, he suggested installing a trail camera to monitor the coop. We drove to the sporting goods store in Cascade Falls and bought a high-end camera designed for hunting surveillance. The device could record heat and motion-activated photos and video. It had infrared night vision and could run for weeks on lithium batteries. Mark spent an afternoon positioning the camera to provide optimal coverage of the coop and surrounding area, then showed me how to review footage on the small LCD screen. For the first month after Mark's departure, the camera recorded exactly what I expected. Raccoons trying to raid the coop, deer browsing near the fence, and the occasional fox investigating the wire. The nocturnal wildlife parade was actually comforting, proof that the ecosystem remained healthy and balanced. Then in early October, everything changed. I checked the camera on a cold morning when frost covered the grass and my breath formed clouds in the air. The display showed 73 motion events overnight, far more than usual. I scrolled through the first images, the usual raccoons and possums, deer passing through, a fox. Then the footage from 2:37 a.m. appeared. The creature filled the frame. It stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair. The infrared camera captured it in stark detail. A massive chest, arms hanging past its knees, a head that seemed too small for its body but sat on shoulders broader than any human's. The face, partially visible in profile, showed features that were disturbingly human, yet fundamentally wrong. A flat nose, pronounced brow ridge, eyes that reflected the infrared light like an animal's. The creature stood completely still for 47 seconds according to the timestamp, staring directly at the camera. Then it turned its head slowly, surveying the property with what seemed like calculated intelligence. It moved with fluid grace, despite its enormous size, stepping toward the chicken coop with deliberate purpose. What happened next made my blood turn to ice. The creature didn't attack the coop randomly or with animal rage. It methodically tested the reinforced wire, finding the weakest point where Mark had joined 2 sections. Then it simply pulled the wire apart with its hands, the heavy gauge metal separating like tissue paper under impossible strength. It reached inside and removed a chicken, holding the terrified bird almost gently. Then, looking directly at the camera again, it twisted the chicken's neck with a casual flick of its wrist. It dropped the dead bird and reached for another. The pattern repeated 6 more times. Each killing was precise, deliberate, performed while staring at the camera. This wasn't feeding behavior. This was a message. The creature was demonstrating its capabilities, showing me what it could do to my livestock, while making sure I understood it knew about the camera. When it finished killing 7 chickens, it stood upright again, its massive frame dominating the camera's field of view. Then it did something that still haunts my dreams. It raised one enormous hand and waved at the camera. Not a friendly gesture, but a slow, deliberate motion that carried unmistakable meaning. I see you, I know you're watching, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Then it turned and walked into the forest, moving with shocking silence for something so massive. I played that footage 17 times that morning, each viewing confirming what my rational mind desperately wanted to deny. I had documented something that shouldn't exist, something that demonstrated intelligence, purpose, and a terrifying understanding of human technology. I immediately called Mark and Jennifer. Mark thought I'd misidentified a bear, despite the clear bipedal locomotion in the footage. Jennifer suggested the isolation and grief over Ellen's death might be causing me to see things that weren't there. Neither took my evidence seriously, though both renewed their arguments for me to sell the ranch and move to civilization. I should have listened. Instead, anger and stubborn pride kept me rooted to land that had been in my family for over a century. I wouldn't be driven away by some animal, no matter how unusual. I reinforced the chicken coop again, this time using heavy chain-link fencing that should have stopped anything short of a bulldozer. I added more cameras, positioning them to cover the entire property perimeter. I started sleeping with the rifle beside my bed and the pistol on my nightstand. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The cameras recorded normal wildlife activity. My sheep and remaining chickens stayed safe. I began to hope the creature had moved on, found easier prey elsewhere in the vast wilderness. Then the woodknocks started. They began just after sunset, when twilight painted the forest in shades of gray and purple. Single loud impacts that sounded like someone striking a tree with a baseball bat. The sounds came from different locations around my property, sometimes close together, sometimes separated by minutes. The pattern was unmistakable. Communication between multiple individuals. There wasn't just one creature out there. There were several, and they were coordinating their movements around my land. The vocalizations followed high-pitched screams that raised every hair on my body, Deep whooping calls that resonated in my chest, sounds that seemed designed to intimidate and terrify. They never came close enough to be seen clearly, but I caught glimpses of massive shadows moving between the trees in the fading light. On October 23rd, I woke to complete silence. The normal forest sounds, insects, small mammals, birds, were completely absent. The silence was so profound it felt like physical pressure against my ears. I got up and looked out the bedroom window. The motion-activated floodlights illuminated the area around the house in harsh white light. Beyond that circle of illumination, darkness pressed in like a living thing. Then I saw them. At least 4 massive shapes standing just beyond the reach of the lights, perfectly still. They were positioned at the cardinal points around my house, north, south, east, and west. They stood there for over an hour, not moving, not making any sound, just watching, waiting. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with the rifle across my lap, watching the windows, listening to the oppressive silence. When dawn finally came, the creatures were gone, but their message was clear. They could surround my house any time they wanted. I was trapped, isolated at their mercy. The siege intensified over the following days. They came every night, surrounding the house in silence. Sometimes 4, sometimes I counted 6 distinct shapes in the darkness beyond the lights. They never attacked directly, never tried to break in. They didn't need to. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. I stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time. I lost weight as fear killed my appetite. My hands developed a constant tremor. I was being hunted by something that understood intimidation and terror as weapons more effective than physical violence. My children called and heard the stress in my voice, but attributed it to loneliness and grief. They couldn't comprehend the reality of my situation because it fell outside their understanding of what was possible. On November 3rd, the creatures escalated. I woke to a sound I'd never heard before, something massive walking on my roof. The old house shook under the weight of footsteps crossing from one end to the other, back and forth for hours. Dust fell from the ceiling beams, furniture rattled, and I sat frozen in terror, knowing that if the creature wanted to, it could tear through the roof and end me, but it didn't. It just walked, demonstrating its power, showing me that no barrier I could construct would keep it out if it chose to enter. When morning came, I climbed onto the roof to find massive footprints pressed into the shingles. Each print had punched through the weather-worn asphalt, leaving permanent damage that would cost thousands to repair properly. That was the night I decided to leave, not because I was beaten, though I certainly was. Not because I finally accepted that the land wasn't mine anymore, though the truth was undeniable. I left because I realized these creatures were intelligent enough to have killed me a dozen times already, but chose not to. They were playing with me, studying me, perhaps even enjoying my fear, and I understood that when they tired of their game, I would die. It took me 2 days to pack essentials and arrange for a livestock transport company to collect my sheep. I called a real estate agent in Cascade Falls and told her to list the property immediately. I called my children and told them I was moving to Portland, letting them believe their arguments had finally convinced me. I didn't tell them about the creatures still circling my house each night. I didn't mention the sound of wood knocks echoing through the forest as I loaded my truck with belongings accumulated over 68 years. I certainly didn't describe the feeling of eyes watching from the tree line as I took one last look at the house where I was born. The drive down the mountain felt like escaping a war zone. Every mile between me and that property lifted a weight from my chest. I found an apartment in Portland within a week, a sterile 3rd-floor unit in a building full of strangers. The traffic noise that bothered other residents was music to me. The streetlights that kept neighbors awake were a comfort. For the first time in months, I slept for more than an hour, though my dreams were filled with massive shapes and glowing eyes. The real estate agent called 2 months later with surprising news. A young couple from California wanted to buy the ranch. They were outdoor enthusiasts looking to escape urban life and raise a family in pristine wilderness. They'd offered full asking price, rare in the current market. The agent seemed delighted. I felt sick with guilt. I should have told them what was waiting in those forests. I should have explained why the property was being sold so far below its true value for land in such a desirable location. But what would I have said? How do you warn someone about monsters without sounding insane? I signed the papers and tried to forget about the young couple moving into my family home 3 months later. The real estate agent called again. The couple was reselling the property. They'd lived there only 6 weeks before deciding the isolation was too much. The agent seemed confused by the rapid reversal, but asked if I knew anyone else who might be interested. I didn't ask what happened during those 6 weeks. I didn't want to know if the creatures had welcomed new residents, the same way they'd bid me farewell. The property remains on the market today, the price dropping every few months as potential buyers visit and decide the remote location doesn't suit their needs. I know the truth. People who spend even one night in that house feel something wrong in the forest. They hear sounds that raise atavistic fears. They see shapes moving between the trees that don't match any animal they can name. And they leave, driven by instincts older than civilization that scream warnings about predators in the darkness. The trail camera footage remains in a locked box in my apartment closet. 35 minutes of high-definition proof that something exists in those forests that science refuses to acknowledge. I've thought about sending it to researchers, wildlife officials, even television programs that investigate such phenomena. But I know what would happen. The footage would be dismissed as a hoax, explained away with technical jargon about video compression and pixelation. Experts would testify that the creature was obviously a person in a costume, despite its impossible size and fluid movement. Skeptics would point to countless fake videos and photos that have polluted any serious investigation of these creatures. And I would become a laughingstock, an old man chasing folklore and fairy tales, desperate for attention or perhaps suffering from early dementia. The creatures know this. They understand that human skepticism is their greatest protection. They can walk through forests, photographed by satellites, leave footprints that should be scientifically documented, demonstrate intelligence that should demand investigation. But because mainstream science has decided they can't exist, they remain safely hidden in plain sight. My daughter Jennifer worries about my mental health, suggests that therapy could help me process the trauma of losing the family ranch Mark calls weekly, to check on my adjustment to urban life, offering to help me find activities that might ease the transition. They're good children, loving and attentive, but they live in a world where monsters exist only in movies and family legends. I've considered writing everything I experienced, creating a complete record that might warn future victims or help researchers understand what lurks in the deep wilderness. But who would believe such an account? The scientific community dismisses creature encounters as misidentification and wishful thinking. Law enforcement treats such reports as evidence of mental instability. Even my own family would probably interpret a written confession as proof that isolation and grief had finally pushed me over the edge. So I remain silent, carrying knowledge that grows heavier with each passing day. Somewhere in the northern Oregon mountains, intelligent predators maintain territory that humans enter at their own risk. They move through ancient forests with the confidence of apex beings who have never known a superior force. They possess cunning refined over millennia to avoid scientific detection, an understanding of human behavior that borders on prescient and physical strength, capable of eliminating any threat to their domain with terrifying efficiency. These are not simple animals operating on instinct. They remember faces with the clarity of grudge holders. They recognize individual humans even after months or years have passed. They demonstrate a capacity for methodical, patient revenge that speaks of intelligence equal to ours. perhaps superior in ways we're not equipped to measure or understand. The security camera footage captured more than just an animal attack on my chicken coop. It documented the existence of beings that defy everything we believe we know about the natural world. Creatures that possess the worst qualities of both human and animal nature combined into something uniquely terrifying. They exhibit the patience of natural predators who can wait motionless for hours. They demonstrate the strategic thinking of military tacticians coordinating complex maneuvers. They show the ruthlessness of beings completely unconstrained by empathy or moral consideration. They're intelligent enough to understand human technology, bold enough to perform for cameras they know are recording, and calculating enough to use psychological warfare as their primary weapon. They don't simply defend territory, they dominate it with a possessiveness that views any human presence as an intolerable intrusion requiring response. I was lucky to escape with my life, though luck seems an inadequate word for what was more likely a deliberate choice on their part. They could have killed me during any of those nights when they surrounded my house. They could have torn through the walls, shattered the windows, ended my existence with the same casual efficiency they displayed killing my chickens, but they didn't. And that calculated mercy is somehow more terrifying than violence would have been, because it means they were making choices, exercising judgment, deciding my fate based on criteria I can't begin to understand. The young couple who tried to replace me, who bought my family's land full of dreams about sustainable living and raising children in pristine wilderness, were fortunate to recognize the danger before it was too late. 6 weeks was all it took for them to feel what I felt, to hear what I heard, to understand at some primal level that they were being assessed by intelligences that saw them as trespassers rather than neighbors, but others won't be so wise or so quick to retreat. The wilderness is vast, spanning millions of acres of territory, so remote that helicopters couldn't reach you in time, even if you could call for help. These creatures have learned to exploit human arrogance and skepticism to their advantage with the skill of master manipulators. They know we won't believe survivors who come stumbling out of the forest with tales of bipedal giants and glowing eyes in the darkness. They understand that modern society has erected walls of scientific materialism so rigid that evidence itself becomes irrelevant when it contradicts accepted reality. They know we won't take precautions against threats that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge, that we'll dismiss footprints as hoaxes and vocalizations, as misidentified animal sounds. Our certainty that we've catalogued all significant species on this continent has become their greatest camouflage. Every time I see news reports about missing hikers or unexplained disappearances in remote areas, my stomach clenches with recognition and guilt. Every description of someone who wandered off the trail and vanished without a trace makes me wonder if another family is about to learn what I learned that October night. Every search party that finds nothing but scattered belongings and inexplicable evidence makes me think of massive hands capable of carrying a full-grown human into forest depths no searcher will ever reach. I wonder if somewhere in the darkness between the trees, ancient eyes are watching new victims with the patience of beings who measure time in seasons rather than hours. I wonder if they're calculating the perfect moment to strike, to teach another lesson about who truly owns these mountains, to demonstrate once again that human dominion ends where the pavement does. The knowledge that I could warn them, could potentially save them, weighs on my conscience like a physical burden that grows heavier with each passing month. I could contact park services, send anonymous letters to hiking organizations, post warnings on outdoor recreation websites. But who would listen to an old man's tale about forest monsters? Who would take seriously a story about 8-foot-tall creatures that wave at security cameras and conduct psychological warfare against isolated homesteaders? The moment I opened my mouth, I would be dismissed as a crank. a storyteller, possibly someone suffering from early dementia or the lingering effects of grief. My daughter would use it as further evidence that I need professional help. My son would worry that the isolation damaged me more than they realized, and the people I was trying to protect would scroll past my warnings without a second thought, confident that such things only happen in movies and campfire stories. Who would believe that nightmare material walks on two legs through the wilderness, leaving footprints too large for any known animal and demonstrating intelligence too advanced for any creature that science has catalogued? Who would accept that there are beings in North American forests that understand cause and effect, that plan coordinated actions, that recognize individual humans and respond to their presence with calculated strategies designed to intimidate and control? The gulf between what I know and what society is prepared to accept feels insurmountable. Truth becomes irrelevant when it falls outside the boundaries of acceptable reality. The trail camera footage remains hidden in my apartment closet, sealed in a waterproof container and buried beneath boxes of old photographs and Ellen's belongings that I couldn't bear to donate 35 minutes of high-definition proof that the world is much stranger and more dangerous than most people can accept. 35 minutes of a creature that shouldn't exist, demonstrating capabilities that defy natural law as we understand it. 35 minutes of evidence that would either revolutionize primatology and cryptozoology, or more likely be dismissed as an elaborate hoax created by a lonely old man seeking attention. Someday, perhaps, I'll find the courage to share it with someone who might believe, someone with the authority and resources to investigate further, someone whose reputation and credentials might give the evidence credibility mine cannot provide. But until that day comes, I'll continue living with the knowledge that there are things in the wilderness that see humans not as the dominant species on this planet, but as prey. Clever prey, certainly. Technologically advanced prey that can be dangerous when cornered. But prey nonetheless, occupying a position in their hierarchy somewhere between nuisance and threat, never rising to the level of equal. The house where 5 generations of Hendersons made their home now stands empty, its windows dark and lifeless, its doors secured against nothing more dangerous than weather and vandals. The for sale sign in the front yard has weathered 2 winters now, the price dropping every few months as potential buyers tour the property and politely decline to make offers. Real estate agents describe it as charming but remote, rustic but requiring extensive updates. They don't mention the feeling of being watched that settles over visitors after sunset. They don't discuss the strange sounds that echo from the forest when night falls. They certainly don't reveal that 2 sets of owners have fled the property within months of moving in. But the forest surrounding that empty house teems with intelligence older and more cunning than ours, creatures that have learned to thrive in the spaces between human knowledge and human belief. They've mastered the art of existing just beyond the reach of scientific confirmation, leaving evidence that can always be explained away, demonstrating capabilities that can always be attributed to misidentification or exaggeration. They've learned that humans need consensus before accepting reality, that we require peer review and reproducible results before acknowledging what our own eyes show us, and they've learned to exploit that requirement, to remain forever in the category of unconfirmed and therefore safely ignored by the institutions that might actually pose a threat to their dominion. I survived my encounter with the unknown. I packed my belongings, abandoned my family's legacy, and fled to the safety of the city like a refugee escaping a war zone. But I'll never truly escape it. The experience has marked me in ways that go deeper than memory, has changed something fundamental about how I see the world and my place in it. Every night when I turn off the lights in my secure suburban apartment, surrounded by neighbors and streetlights and all the infrastructure of civilization, I remember the sound of massive footsteps circling my house, the weight of them shaking dust from the ceiling beams. The deliberate pace that spoke of beings in no hurry, confident in their dominance, taking their time because they knew I had nowhere to go and no one to call for help. Every shadow reminds me of shapes moving through moonlight with predatory grace, bipedal forms that shouldn't exist, gliding between trees with the silence of natural hunters. Every unexplained sound in the darkness brings back the memory of wood knocks echoing through silent trees. Those rhythmic impacts that carried meaning I couldn't decipher but understood instinctively as communication. Messages passing between creatures that humanity refuses to acknowledge, coordinating their movements, sharing information, operating with the sophistication of beings whose society and culture we can't begin to comprehend because we won't admit they exist. The trail camera captured the truth that October night. It recorded undeniable evidence of something that challenges everything we think we know about North American wildlife. The question that torments me is whether anyone will ever be ready to accept what it reveals, whether our species has the courage to acknowledge that we share this world with intelligences that learned to hunt us long before we learned to hunt them, whether we can humble ourselves enough to admit that our understanding of the natural world remains fundamentally incomplete, that there are gaps in our knowledge large enough to hide entire species of large primates in forests we believe we've thoroughly mapped and studied in the deep wilderness, where cell phones don't work and the nearest help is days away even in ideal conditions. Ancient predators still claim territory that human maps have never accurately charted. They watch from the tree line with eyes adapted to darkness our species can barely imagine, patient and calculating, waiting for the next family to build a home too close to their domain. They've watched humans come and go for generations, perhaps centuries. They've observed us clear forests and build roads, establish settlements, and abandon them when the isolation becomes too much. They've learned our patterns, our weaknesses, our tendency to dismiss what we can't explain. And when that next family arrives, full of confidence in their technological superiority and scientific understanding, carrying smartphones and satellite communicators that won't function in the deep valleys where these creatures make their homes, they'll discover what I learned in the mountains of northern Oregon. Some legends are real. Some monsters walk on two legs through forests that predate human memory, and some truths are too dangerous for civilized society to accept, no matter how convincing the evidence might be, because accepting them would require us to fundamentally reconsider our place in the natural order. The footage exists, stored in a closet in Portland, proof that could change everything if anyone had the courage to take it seriously. The creatures endure, moving through their territory with the confidence of beings who have never been successfully challenged, who have outlasted every human attempt at settlement in their domain. And somewhere in the wilderness, at this very moment, they're still watching, still waiting, still protecting territory that humans enter at their own risk, often without even realizing the danger until it's too late to retreat. My name is Thomas Henderson, and this is why I'll never go home again.